The struggle for India's freedom. Nationalism. We belong to a nation. We are one. We are held together by a bond of history, economic goals, and cultural knots. This was the unique feeling of nationalism which arose in the hearts of Indians in the second half of the 19th century after the revolt of 1857. This feeling motivated Indians to stand against a common enemy, the British government. In December 1885, the Indian National Congress was born. Under the leadership of this organization, the Indians fought a long and courageous struggle for independence, which was finally won on 15th August 1947. Factors that led to the rise of Indian nationalism. Accumulated grievances of the people. All sections of the Indian society suffered under the British rule. The peasants were burdened with the land revenue systems. The Indian craftsmen could not compete with the cheaper British machine-made goods. The educated middle-class Indians were frustrated because they were not given any share administration and were only given low-paid menial jobs, and the rising Indian capitalist class as unhappy because it did not get any support or protection from the British government. Thus, Indian nationalist movement arose mainly because British imperialism had a negative impact on the lives of the Indian people. Administrative and economic unification of the country. The British administrative and economic policies united India into a nation. The British had introduced a common administrative system, legal system, modern transport, communication, and economic policies. For the first time, all sections of the Indian society faced a common enemy and a common method of exploitation. Western thought and education. Western educated middle-class Indians were exposed to modern, democratic, rational, and secular ideas. These educated Indians were the first to feel the humiliation and the evil effects of the British rule. They wanted a strong, united, and prosperous India. The educated Indians were inspired by the ideals of the French and American revolutions, and they wanted to emulate the revolutionary ideas of liberty and freedom. Racial arrogance of the British. The British practiced racial discrimination against the Indians. The Indians were not allowed to enter into the European clubs and not even permitted to share the same compartment in a train with the European passengers. The Arms Act was another example of the racial discrimination. Lord Lytton passed this act in 1875, which meant that Indians could not keep firearms without appropriate license. Another discriminatory act passed by the British was the Vernacular Press Act of 1878, curbing the freedom of the vernacular newspapers. Strong protests by the British in India against the Ilbert Bill of 1883, which tried to give the Indian judges the power to judge the cases of British and other Europeans, and the withdrawal of this bill proved that the British were not ready to give equal political rights to the Indians. As a result, the Indians felt very humiliated and stood as one against the British rule. This growing sense of nationalism led to the formation of many political organizations in different parts of India. Example, Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, Madras Mahajan Sabha, Bombay Presidency Association, etc. The most important of these associations was the Indian Association of Calcutta. Finally, the need for an all-India organization led to the establishment of Indian National Congress. The Indian National Congress, INC. The Indian National Congress was founded at Bombay, now Mumbai, at a meeting from 28th to 30th December 1885. This meeting was organized by a retired British official named Alan Octavio Hume, Dadabhai Naoroji, and a few others. 72 delegates from all over India attended this first meeting. Vomesh Chandra Banerjee, Dadabhai Naoroji, Badruddin Tayyabji, Firoz Shah Mehta, Surendranath Banerjee, S. Subramanya Iyer, Romesh Chandra Dutt, Dinshaw Adalji Vacha, etc. were among those who attended this meeting. Indian nationalism, the moderate phase, 1885 to 1905. The Indian national movement up to 1905 was dominated by the leaders called moderates. These leaders wanted to persuade the British to give the Indians some participation in the administration and introduce political reforms. Their method of agitation was also moderate, based on petitions, meetings, and speeches. The moderates wanted more representation for the Indians in the legislative councils. They wanted Indians to be given high posts in the government service. So they demanded that the Indian Civil Service examination should also be held in India along with London, so that it would be easier for the Indians to sit for this examination. Some of the other demands of the moderates were separation of judiciary from the executive, spread of primary education among the masses, repeal of the Arms Act, and freedom of speech and expression. In the economic sphere, they wanted rapid development of modern industries. They strongly criticized India's wealth being drained to England and demanded that this drain must be stopped. They demanded the reduction in land revenue to lighten the burden of taxation on the peasants. They criticized the high military expenditure of the government and demanded its reduction. They said that high taxation was one of the causes of India's poverty. They also protested against the treatment of Indian laborers abroad. Thus, the moderate leadership was concerned about the problems and exploitation of the masses. The moderates trusted the British and believed that the British would accept their just demands. Many of them felt that Indians had still to learn from the British, and the time was not yet ripe to throw a direct challenge to the foreign rule. The extremists, radicals, 1905 to 1915. The reluctance of the British government to accept any important demands of the moderates disappointed many politically conscious people. Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Rai, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Aurobindo Ghosh wanted the Indians to be self-reliant and to develop self-respect. They told the people that the remedy to their plight lay in their own hands and that they should become fearless and strong. They deeply hated the British rule and declared that Swaraj was their goal. Tilak raised the slogan, "Freedom is my birthright and I shall have it." They had deep faith in the strength of the masses and proposed to achieve Swaraj through mass action. As their demands were much more radical as compared to the moderates, they were called the extremists. Partition of Bengal. The growing spirit of militant nationalism got a boost when Bengal was partitioned in 1905. Viceroy Lord Curzon divided the province of Bengal into two parts, Eastern Bengal and Assam as one part, and the rest of Bengal, which included West Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, now Odisha, as the other part. The justification given for the partition was that Bengal was too big as a province to be administered efficiently and therefore should be divided for administrative convenience. However, the actual political motive was to crush the rising wave of nationalism in Bengal and to play the divide and rule policy by separating the Hindus and the Muslims. The partition of Bengal made the Indians very angry. They saw the act of partition as a challenge to Indian nationalism and started a powerful anti-partition movement, Swadeshi and Boycott movement. To challenge the partition of Bengal, Swadeshi and Boycott movement was launched. Swadeshi meant the use of Indian goods, and the boycott of British goods became the main feature of this movement. The aim of the Swadeshi and boycott movement was the development of self-reliance or Atma Shakti. So, India wanted to assert economic independence by mass burning of foreign clothes and by picketing the shops selling foreign cloth and other foreign goods. The Indians started opening their own textile mills, soap and match factories, handloom weaving units, banks and insurance companies. A significant feature of this movement was the participation by the student community. Another remarkable aspect of the movement was the active participation of women. The British were determined to suppress the movement. They started arresting the Indian leaders involved in the Swadeshi and boycott movement. Tilak, the main leader of the movement, was arrested and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment in Mandalay, Burma. Swadeshi and boycott movements proved that if Indians united, they could launch powerful movement against the British rule. Finally, in 1911, the British government cancelled the partition of Bengal and decided to reunite Western and Eastern Bengal and to create a new province comprising Bihar and Orissa, now Odisha. Rise of revolutionaries. There were groups who did not believe in the peaceful methods of the Congress. These revolutionaries were active in Bengal, Maharashtra, Punjab and Tamil Nadu. They wanted to throw out the British by violent acts. As the revolutionary newspaper Yugantar, a Bengali revolutionary newspaper, declared, "Force must be stopped by force." Their methods involved assassination of unpopular officials, looting of arms and cash and acts of sabotage. The revolutionaries formed secret societies. V.D. Savarkar organized a secret society called Abhinav Bharat. One of the most famous secret societies was the Anushilan Samiti. In 1908, Khudiram Bose and Praful Chaki, two young men, threw a bomb at a carriage near Kakori, which they thought was occupied by King's Ford, the unpopular judge at Muzaffarpur. While Praful Chaki shot himself dead, Khudiram was tried and hanged. The revolutionary groups also started publishing newspapers to spread their ideas. The Sandhya and Yugantar in Bengal and Kal in Maharashtra were the most prominent. The revolutionaries also established centers of activity abroad. In London, the lead was taken by V.D. Savarkar, Lala Hardayal and Shamji Krishnavarma, while in Europe, Madam Bhikaji Kama and Ajit Singh were the prominent leaders. Indian revolutionaries in the United States of America and Canada established the Ghadar Party at San Francisco in 1913. The aim of the Ghadar Party was to stir up the rebellion in India. Though the revolutionaries could not throw out the British, their courage and heroism inspired the Indians. In 1911, George V announced that capital of India would be shifted from Calcutta to Delhi.
Formation of Muslim League, 1906.
In order to weaken the Indian national movement, the British had started playing the game of divide and rule to separate the Hindus and the Muslims.
This led to the formation of Muslim League
The League showed its separatist tendencies when it supported the partition of Bengal and also started requesting the British to give the Muslims a separate electorate. Surat Split, 1907.
The difference in the police and methods of the moderates and extremists finally led to a split between the two at the Surat session of the Indian National Congress in 1907.
The Congress remained under the control of the moderates while the extremists were excluded.
Morley-Minto Reforms, 1909. The British enacted the Indian Councils Act in 1909.
The Act tried to please the moderates by increasing the number of elected members in the Imperial Legislative Council and the Provincial Council. But the councils had no real power. Moreover, the reforms introduced the dangerous principle of separate electorates for the Muslims. This was a part of the divide and rule policy of the British. Thus, it was very clear that these reforms had not really granted much. The First World War and the Lucknow Pact. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Indian nationalists decided to support the British government in the hope that after the war, the British will bring about major political reforms in India. But Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant continued their agitation demanding Swaraj. They started the Home Rule movement demanding self-government for India. A positive development took place in 1916 when in the Lucknow session of the Congress, moderates and extremists were reunited. Moreover, Congress and Muslim League signed the Lucknow Pact in 1916 and decided to present common political demands before the government. Impact of the First World War. After the First World War, 1914 to 1919, Indian national movement was intensified. Indians had hoped that the British will bring about major political changes after the First World War, but they did not fulfill these promises. So, the Indians felt betrayed. Moreover, the war led to a huge rise in the defense expenditure of the British, leading to the increase of taxes on Indians. The war also led to shortage of goods and a high rise in prices. Moreover, the British forcibly recruited the soldiers for the war and pressurized the Indian villages to supply soldiers for the war. This was deeply resented by the Indians. However, these Indian soldiers returned from the war with a knowledge of the outside world and with new ideas of freedom. Finally, the Russian Revolution of 1917 inspired the Indians. They learned that if the masses unite, they can overthrow the most oppressive government in the world. Thus, the First World War created a new political stir in India. Mahatma Gandhi and the nationalist movement. Mahatma Gandhi arrived in India in 1915 from South Africa. He brought with him a new theory of struggle through non-violence and non-cooperation based on satyagraha. The technique of satyagraha was based on truth and non-violence. A satyagrahi will always be truthful and peaceful. At the same time, he would never submit to what he considered was wrong. A true satyagrahi would be fearless. He would never bow down before evil. According to Gandhiji, non-violence was not a weapon of the weak. Only the strong and the brave could practice it. Gandhiji had immense faith in the strength of the common people to fight. He drew the attention and focus of the Indian national movement to the villages, where the majority of Indians lived. Soon after his arrival in India, he took up the cause of the peasants of Champaran in Bihar who were being forced by the European planters to cultivate indigo. He also took up the cause of the mill workers of Ahmedabad who were given very low wages and the peasants of the Kheda district of Gujarat who were overburdened with high land revenues. Participating in these local movements, Gandhiji learned about the problems and sufferings of the Indian masses. Apart from fighting for the freedom of India, he took up the cause of Hindu-Muslim unity. He fought all his life against untouchability and strongly advocated a rise in the social status of the Indian women. The Rowlatt Satyagraha. In March 1919, the British government in India passed the Rowlatt Act, which allowed the government to arrest and imprison any person without trial or conviction by the court. Indians strongly opposed this act and out of hatred called it the Black Act. Gandhiji decided to launch a satyagraha against this unjust act. This was the first nationwide satyagraha led by Mahatma Gandhi. There were hartals, strikes, processions and demonstrations all over the country. It was during this time that one of the worst political crimes, the infamous Jallianwala Bagh massacre, took place. The military commander of Amritsar, General Dyer, ordered the armed soldiers to open fire at a large unarmed crowd. The crowd had gathered at Jallianwala Bagh to protest against the arrest of the local leaders. This incident shocked the entire nation and unveiled the brutal face of British imperialism. Further evolution of Indian national movement 1922 to 1929. Formation of the Swaraj Party. After the withdrawal of the Khilafat and non-cooperation movement, some congressmen led by Chittaranjan Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party, a party within the Congress. They decided to fight the elections to the legislative councils, enter the legislative council and put forward their demands and oppose the government if their demands were not fulfilled. The revolutionary movement. Revival of the revolutionary movement was an important development. Chandrasekhar Azad formed a revolutionary organization called Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, HSRA. The revolutionaries now wanted to organize a revolution by the masses. Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt threw a bomb in the Central Legislative Assembly on 8th April 1929. The aim was not to kill but to warn the British of the revolutionary spirit. In Bengal, the revolutionaries organized a well-planned raid at the government armory under the leadership of Surya Sen. An important aspect of the revolutionary movement in Bengal was the participation of women. Simon Commission 1927. In 1927, the British government appointed a commission to suggest further constitutional reforms in India. The commission was named after its chairman, Simon. Since all the members of the commission were Englishmen, the Indian nationalists protested against this commission. Wherever the commission went, it was greeted with hartals and black flag demonstrations under the slogan, Simon Go Back. The government used brutal suppression and police attacks to break the popular opposition. The Lahore Session 1929. The Lahore Session of the Congress in 1929 expressed this new militant spirit. Under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Congress passed the historic Purna Swaraj resolution demanding complete independence. On 31st December 1929, the newly adopted tricolour flag of freedom was hoisted. It was also decided in 1930 session of Congress that 26th January will be celebrated every year as Independence Day. Civil Disobedience Movement 1930 to 34. The civil disobedience movement was started by Gandhiji on 12th March 1930 with the famous Dandi March. Along with his 78 followers, Gandhiji walked nearly 375 kilometers from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi, a village on the sea coast of Gujarat. On 6th April, Gandhiji reached Dandi, picked up a handful of salt and broke the salt law as a symbol of Indian people's refusal to live under British laws and as such under British rule. The civil disobedience movement led by Gandhiji spread all over the country. In addition to the violation of salt laws, people boycotted forest laws, foreign goods, and refused to pay unjust land revenue and other taxes. A special feature of the movement was the wide participation of women. Roundtable Conference. The British government organized the first Roundtable Conference in 1930 to discuss the Simon Commission report, but the Congress boycotted it. The British wanted the Congress to attend the second Roundtable Conference. So, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, signed a pact with Gandhiji called Gandhi-Irwin Pact. In return, Gandhiji agreed to go to London and attend the conference after suspending the civil disobedience movement. But the conference failed because the British were not ready to accept any of the basic demands of the Congress. On his return to India, Gandhiji resumed the civil disobedience movement, which continued till 1934. Though the movement did not bring freedom, it made the people more conscious and politically active. Government of India Act of 1935. Pressurized by the agitations of the Indians, the British government passed the Government of India Act of 1935, which gave autonomy to the Indian provinces and elections were held for the provincial legislatures. Congress marked its popularity by forming ministries in 7 out of 11 provinces in the elections held in 1937. The act tried to address the demands of the Indians but fell short of their expectations. Indian national movement during the Second World War. Resignation of Congress ministries. When the Second World War broke out in September 1939, Congress was ready to give support to the British in the war. But in return, they wanted India to be granted independence after the war. But the British refused to grant this demand. The Congress ministries therefore resigned in protest. Failure of the Cripps mission. To secure the cooperation of the Indians in the war and to get the resources and manpower from India to fight the war, the British sent in March 1942 a mission headed by a cabinet minister, Sir Stafford Cripps. But the negotiations failed because the Indian leaders were not satisfied with the vague promise to increase the number of Indian members in the Viceroy's Executive Council. The British government refused to accept the Council demand for the immediate transfer of effective power to the Indians. Quit India Movement 1942. After the failure of the Cripps mission, Congress decided to further pressurize the British to accept their demand for independence. On 8th August 1942, the Congress under the leadership of Gandhiji passed the Quit India Resolution, demanding an immediate end to the British rule in India. On the morning of 9th August, Gandhiji and all other Congress leaders were arrested and the Congress was declared illegal. But the movement could not be crushed. All over the country, there were hartals, strikes and demonstrations. The people attacked the police stations, post offices, railway stations, etc. At many places, parallel governments were set up. The British tried to crush the movement very harshly. Indian National Army, INA, and Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the most powerful nationalist leaders, escaped from India during this period to organize an armed struggle against the British rule. He formed the Azad Hind Fauj, Indian National Army, in Singapore to launch a military campaign for the liberation of India. Subhash Chandra Bose inspired the people with his plea, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom." Subhash Chandra Bose, popularly known as Netaji, gave his followers the battle cry of Jai Hind. The INA joined the Japanese army in its march on India from Burma. However, when Japan was defeated in the Second World War, INA too had to give up its plan. However, INA and its leader Netaji set an inspiring example of patriotism before the people of India. Indian nationalism after the Second World War. After the Second World War, the British realized that they could not rule India for long. The Indians would no longer tolerate the humiliation of foreign rule. The British government therefore sent a cabinet mission to India in March 1946 to negotiate with the Indian leaders the terms for the transfer of power to the Indians. The cabinet mission suggested that India should be a federation while giving a large amount of autonomy to the provinces and states. But the Congress and the Muslim League did not agree to certain aspects of the proposal. There was no option but the partition of the country. The British policy of divide and rule had helped in creating a rift between the Congress and the Muslim League. In 1940, the Muslim League passed a resolution demanding partition of the country and the creation of a state to be called Pakistan. After the failure of the cabinet mission, large-scale communal riots started in different parts of the country. On 16th August 1946, Muslim League launched the Direct Action Day to get Pakistan by brutal force. Mahatma Gandhi toured East Bengal and Bihar to check these terrible riots. India wins freedom, 1947. Finally, Lord Mountbatten, the Viceroy of India, announced that India would become a free nation and a new state of Pakistan will be created along with a free India. The nationalist leaders reluctantly agreed to the partition in order to bring to an end the terrible communal riots. On 15th August 1947, India celebrated its first day of freedom. But the sense of joy was mixed with pain and sadness of partition. The sacrifices of generations of patriots and martyrs had borne fruit. In a historic address to the nation on 14th August in 1947, Nehru put into poetic words the feeling of the people of India through his Tryst and Destiny speech. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.